The Hisense A9 is widely considered the best e-ink phone right now. And I have to agree, especially after flashing an unofficial port of LineageOS 21, upgrading it to Android 14 from 11. This not only makes it more future-proof, but also enhances its privacy features. But before we dive into that, let's take a quick look at the overall design and specs for those who aren't familiar with the Hisense A9 already. The 6.1-inch ink display has a crisp 300 ppi resolution, similar to a Kindle. It's readable in sunlight and also includes a built-in frontlight for use in the dark. As the name suggests, a frontlight is not illuminating the screen from behind the pixels, which is not possible with the ink, but from the front. There are a couple of LEDs hidden in the bezel, and the light is spread with a carrier film evenly across the screen, which should help with eye strain if that's why you're looking into getting an e-ink phone. Another reason for a phone like this could be that you want to stop doom scrolling and are looking for ways to digital detox without sacrificing all comforts of a smartphone, which this device balances perfectly in my opinion. The screen has a matte protector rather than being matte itself, which personally I'm not a huge fan of. So don't remove it without a replacement, but it effectively reduces glare, even better than some competitors. The phone itself is bulkier than what you'd find on regular phones with that screen size. So for comparison, my Samsung Galaxy S22 also has a 6.1-inch screen, but since the bezels are much smaller and the aspect ratio is a bit different, the Galaxy feels more compact. With its thick bezels around the display, the Hisense A9 is almost identical to the Boox Palma, which has the same display but a completely different industrial design otherwise. These straight lines and clear-cut edges make the Hisense A9 feel a lot more like a typical phone. The only thing I don't like about it is how sharp the edge on the back of the device feels. Not sharp enough to cut me, not by a long shot, but still sharp enough to be annoying during day-to-day use. The rest of the device is well built, however. It's plastic all around, but honestly it's fine and doesn't bother me. With 186 grams, it's not the lightest e-ink phone, but it's not heavy either, and feels totally fine to handle in everyday use. There's a 13 megapixels camera with an LED on the back, and a 5 megapixels camera on the front. The power button on the right side doubles as a fingerprint reader, which is quite snappy, and right above is the volume rocker. On the other side is a customizable button and a SIM card slot for 2 SIM cards. Yes, this is a dual SIM phone, but it doesn't have the option to expand the 128 gigs of internal storage, of which around 100 gigs are usable. There's also a 256 gigs version available if you need more storage. On the top is a mic and a headphones jack, which is something you don't see very often these days anymore. And on the bottom is the USB-C port, the mono speaker, and another mic. The Hisense A9 uses a Snapdragon 662 chip with either 4, 6, or 8 gigs of RAM. So the phone is available with these 3 configurations, of which the largest one also gets the larger internal storage I mentioned before. The Snapdragon 662 is the same chip you find in many Boox devices of the recent past. So it's no stranger to the e-ink community and is easily fast enough for everyday tasks. Okay, let's talk about the software. Out of the box, the Hisense A9 runs a customized version of Android 11, which the company calls inkOS. And it actually offers a really well-optimized user interface for the e-ink screen, with high contrast borders, almost no grayscale elements, and different e-ink viewing modes to make Android apps on e-ink usable. Because same as in the Boox Palma and other ink devices with Android, you need to adapt the viewing modes from time to time for certain apps to actually make them usable. Because e-ink is typically a very slow technology that initially was only meant for reading. So just from the looks of it, inkOS looks like a decent user interface. But there were a couple of issues for me that made me switch to LineageOS pretty quickly. The whole inkOS system is made for the Chinese market and wasn't optimized for global usage. You can see that with a couple of apps just being available in Chinese. Which brings me to my second issue, and that is bloating. There was so much unnecessary stuff on here that deep loading is essentially a must if you're using this outside of China, if you ask me. Another problem for me was the phoning home situation with Hisense phones, which, for full transparency, I didn't check myself this time around since I already decided to switch at this point. So I didn't start poking around with Wireshark to see what's exactly going on here, but there are a couple of reports out there mentioning it. The Google Play situation out of the box was also not ideal. The Hisense A9 doesn't have Google Play pre-installed, but some sellers actually add it before shipping it out to Western markets. But that's a bit of a hack, and I'd rather have a clean integration right from the get-go. And last but not least, it was running Android 11, which, to be fair, I think is fine in terms of app compatibility right now, and I doubt it will be a problem anytime soon, but a newer version of Android would obviously be better. So I'm not saying that you can't use the Hisense A9 as it is out of the box, quite the opposite in fact. inkOS offers a well-optimized user interface for E-Ink, but there are definitely some compromises that personally I wasn't comfortable with. Luckily, there's a small but active community for different Hisense phones and the A9 specifically. The community not only managed to root it, but also created ROMs that can be flashed without too much trouble. Just going back to the stock version is a bit more complicated. In case you're not familiar, a ROM in this context is a customized version of Android that you can install on the device, typically offering different features and improvements compared to a stock version. So if you're thinking about getting the Hisense A9 and intend to use one of these ROMs, put aside a couple of bucks to buy the developers a coffee or two. You can find the link to the Reddit post for installing custom ROM in the description below. If you flashed custom ROMs before, this is not a difficult process. If you haven't done so before, I recommend reading the very detailed Reddit post very carefully and only proceed if you have everything in place. In either case, when flashing a new ROM, there is always a small chance something goes wrong and you break the device. So that's something you have to do at your own risk. For me, the process went very smoothly, and I flashed the image for the first time within 15 minutes or so, since it works very comfortable with fast boot. There are two different ROMs available right now, and I tried the Google Apps versions of both of them. There are also options available without Google services, but as I said, I wanted to have a clean Google integration, so I opted for those. The AOSP ROM with Android 14 required some extra setup using a screen mirroring app, but overall it worked well. However, I preferred the easier setup of the LineageOS 21 port, which I'll demonstrate in the rest of the video. What I have to say, however, is that this isn't the same optimized user interface as inkOS Hisense has specifically created for E-Ink. What I mean by that is that LineageOS has a lot of low contrast elements, which is also true for the AOSP ROM. So while Google's Material Hue design elements work well on a regular color display, on a black and white E-Ink screen, they don't look that great. Which means I needed to make a few adaptions. The first one being rooting the phone, because the app I needed to use to make the first changes needed root access. Rooting was as easy as flashing the ROM, because the community did all the groundwork already. So I got the boot image, patched it with Magisk, and flashed it, which only took a couple of minutes. I used a paid app called Repainter to switch the color scheme to a high contrast one, and I also turned off animations and adjusted a few other settings to improve visibility. Then I customized the look by installing Nova Launcher, a black and white icon pack, and adding a simple clock and calendar widget to the home screen. And even though it's still not as high contrast as the original inkOS, those changes made the LineageOS UI on the Hisense A9 much more user-friendly. Finally, I added some apps like Adaway, AF Vault Plus, and Hibernate to improve privacy, battery life, and the overall user experience. You can find the links to everything in the description below. Speaking about inkOS, I already mentioned the special viewing modes for E-Ink for Android apps. Those are also available on both ROMs and can be used with the custom button on the left side. One click refreshes the screen to clear ghosting, which is very helpful at times. 2 clicks open the context menu so you can switch the ink mode. And the mode you choose for an app sticks for this specific app, which after a short while makes using the phone really easy because you don't have to switch to your preferred mode for different apps all of the time. The dual-tone front light can also be used with LineageOS, but adapting it is not exactly as comfortable as with inkOS, since you need to enter night mode settings to do that. So I put the control right on top of the control center. I also changed the long press action of the custom key to switch to the night mode. But you can also automate that with the usual Android scheduling option. Android apps work well for the most part, but since this is E-Ink, expect to make a few compromises when running certain apps. But thanks to the different viewing modes, that usually still works well. Even quickly checking out a video is doable, but obviously with some limitations. But that's actually part of the appeal here, especially if you want to stop doom scrolling. It's fine for quickly checking something, but scrolling endlessly on such a device is not the same dopamine rush as on a regular phone. Initially, battery life with the 4100 mAh battery was noticeably better on inkOS, but using the Hibernate app I mentioned before to put apps to sleep more aggressively automatically reduces standby drain with LineageOS to just 1% every 2 hours with connectivity on, giving it up to 200 hours of standby time, which is more than enough to not having to worry about the battery draining for no reason. Battery drain with heavy use was also quite decent, and even with a couple of hours of continuous use and trying a lot of different things when setting up LineageOS for the first time, the battery levels didn't drop at an alarming rate. So even though battery life with the stock ROM with inkOS seems a bit better, it's fine with the LineageOS version I'm using right now as well. The camera is okay, but overall nothing to brag about. I recommend getting a G-Cam port, which produces better pictures than the stock LineageOS camera. With that, pictures are decent, but I wouldn't recommend relying on it for taking your vacation pictures. So what's the catch with the Hisense A9, besides you having to tinker if you want to use LineageOS? The first issue is that this phone is not an easy buy. And I don't mean that I struggled with making the buying decision, I literally mean that it's hard to get outside of China. You can purchase it on AliExpress or DHgate, but not all sellers ship to every country, and not all sellers are reliable. So personally, I got it through eBay, which was pricier, but with the option to use PayPal, that's usually less of a headache. So I was fine with that additional cost. But cost itself is still a con here, because no matter where you get it, bottom line is this is not a cheap phone. With customs and taxes, you'll quickly move past the 400 euros mark. For the 6 and 8 gigs RAM variants, it's even more expensive. And by choosing the most expensive option on eBay, it's over 500 euros. And last but not least, since this phone is meant for the Chinese market, it doesn't have global coverage. Before you buy it, check if your carrier bands are covered. It wasn't an issue for me here in Austria, and it worked right away after putting my SIM card in, but especially in the US, this definitely depends on the carrier. Just a quick note, if you flash LineageOS, make sure to switch to 4G in the network settings. Otherwise, its default setting is 3G, and that was discontinued in Austria a while back. I imagine it's the same in other countries as well. So I only had a regular GSM connection initially. After selecting the 4G option, it's now operating in 4G. Okay, so that's it for this review, which I think was a first because I didn't actually talk a lot about the stock experience, but a very customized use case instead. But thanks to the incredible groundwork laid by the community, the combination of the Hisense A9 and LineageOS creates, in my opinion, the best E-Ink phone you can get right now. Yes, there are some small drawbacks compared to the stock ROM, but it's a small price to pay for a more up-to-date Android version, cleaner Google Service integration, and better privacy. It's actually incredible if you think about how much a small and dedicated community can accomplish While companies that offer these devices, not just the Hisense A9, I'm also talking about the Bigme Hibreak, for example, often struggle with basic features. I honestly think the LineageOS on here and also the AOSP ROM as well make this a much better offering. I'll put the links to everything I mentioned, ROMs, apps and so on in the description below, so check it out if you want to replicate some parts of it. Whether you're looking for relief for your stressed eyes or want an e-ink font to stop doom scrolling, I think the Hisense A9 with LineageOS is essentially the best choice right now, other than just getting a dumb phone. Because it blends smartphone convenience with e-ink's natural barrier against doom scrolling. It's great for quick checks, but not ideal for extended video watching or web browsing, making it both better and worse than regular smartphones in different ways. So what do you think about the Hisense A9 and e-ink phones in general? Have you already made the switch? If so, what's your experience? Let us know in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you found this review helpful. Thanks for your time watching and see you in the next one.